really what Avalanche is a network of blockchains that are interoperable. So the fact that you can have your own isolated execution environment, it tracks a far more diverse group of developers than you would in a monolithic chain.
Welcome back to Total Value Unlocked, a podcast from Hivemind where we explore the technologies and ideas shaping the future of the internet and money. I'm Zhang, the founder of Hivemind, and in this season, we're focusing on the backbone of Web3 blockchain protocols. As always, none of this discussion should be considered financial or investment advice. For more information, please visit our website or contacting Hivemind directly. Today, I'm excited to have my friend Zhang Wu, president of Ava Labs, joining us to discuss the latest development with Avalanche, including the recent announcement of Avalanche 9000, which will be the largest network upgrade that Avalanche has undergone since the mainnet launch. Avalanche has consistently been one of the top layer 1 blockchains, and this new launch promises to take things even further. So very excited to chat more about it. John, welcome. It's great to have you on the podcast.
Matt, I'm very excited to be here. Obviously, we've known each other for a long time. We're friends, and what I appreciate about you is your background's similar to mine. You know, you came from a traditional investing world and you saw benefits of this world, and now you're in this world and likewise.
Yes, and we'll get right into that. John, looking at your background, as you mentioned, finance and technologies has been, very much intertangled. You began at Tiger Management, managing a global tech portfolio at Kingdom Capital, went on to found Surview Capital, and later led SharePost Digital Asset Group, facilitating compliant token trading before eventually joining Ava Labs as the president. How has this range of experience sort of like, formed your viewpoint on the intersection of these two industries, tech and finance?
As a tech investor, I always look for emerging trends and try to get in there before inflection point. What I saw in the blockchain technology was that the killer app, in my opinion, was tokenization. That is a better way to issue, exchange, and own value. I thought that 7 years ago, 8 years ago, when I was CEO of Digital Asset Group at Shares Post, trying to tokenize alternative assets called security token offering, STOs. I still believe that today. In fact, it's even better because the token is actually a great mechanism to coordinate activity as well as incentivize the right activity. In other words, it allows, I think, what I would call open source to become open innovation, because when you can crowdsource development from developers, it is just a lot faster to go to market. And when you can crowdfund projects with like-minded people, they care about one thing, and that also allows you to go to market faster and go, instead of going the traditional entrepreneur route, trying to go to VCs to go raise money.
What do you think that missing from some of the existing financial ecosystems, infrastructures, and system that you think technology actually can bring to fix?
You're talking about traditional finance.
Right.
Well, I think traditional finance, as you know, is riddled with legacy technology, and it has a lot of intermediaries. Some are necessary for good purposes so that there is a compliance check, but others are basically people who've been around, or firms that have been around, just squatting, extracting their Schumpeterian rents in the system and not allowing things to happen in a frictionless, smoother way. The beautiful thing I think about DeFi is that it is a native, open financial system, and it shows the world what it could be like without intermediaries, and where users actually own their own data and it's self-sovereign. So it shows what the world could be like.
Yeah, of course, all of this being said, it's a very natural path for you to enter the Web3 space. What made you decide to join Avalab specifically, and what was it that initially stood out to you about Avalanche that when you first started it?
So it's actually kind of a funny story, because Dr. Eamon Gunseer, the founder, the computer science professor, distributed systems computer science professor, and his PhDs were creating the Avalanche protocol. He actually asked me a couple of times. I remember having lunch with him at the Cornell Club and also meeting him at Cornell. We had known each other for quite a few years already. He actually asked me a couple of times and I said no. But it was not until like late 2019 and then officially starting 2020 where I actually said yes. And here's the reason why, because I was so focused at trying to create access for alternative assets through the STO way, trying to create a marketplace and getting licenses. Effectively, it's a license. ATS is a mechanism. It's not technically a license that allows you to exchange private securities. And tokenizing a private security back then, that's like pre-public, like Uber or Airbnb before they became public securities. That was a private security, or tokenizing funds, etc. So I was so focused on trying to create that mechanism in order to give access to individuals to things that are hard for them to get to, not like a public security. That I realized, though, eventually that not only was it not possible because socially, frankly, the reg tech work, the regulation side, you can create using, the regulation pieces out there and create the stack that works. But even if we were successful there, socially, people weren't really accepting it in 2017, 18. And also, frankly, the Web3 technology at that time was not scalable and it was not cost effective. So we did the math when I was there. My engineers at the Digital Assets Group at SharesPost said, if we were to do the equivalent of an IPO raise on this tech stack, it will cost the same thing as charging 6% and doing a roadshow. It was just really expensive. I saw that from a business needs perspective. Gun, I call him Gun, Dr. Eamon Gun-Sear. He saw it from a technology perspective. So we were very aligned there. But what really got me over the hump was when I talked to Gun, I realized he had the same goals. He's a serious, unbelievable, world-class professor, and he was an OG in this space. He didn't just want to create a crypto for crypto environment. He wanted to take that blockchain technology and allow traditional businesses to apply it to make their products better, especially in traditional finance. That overlap in goals and missions was really what got me over the hump.
That's amazing. And you joined Ava Labs around the time, as you mentioned, that Avalanche mainnet, launchings in 2020. Since then, obviously has made significant strides as a layer 1 blockchain. How would you describe Avalanche's journey so far? What do you think that has been the key for its sustainable growth?
Well, the journey's been fantastic. It's been exhilarating. It's been trying. It's one of those things. It's funny because I think people in the space as operators realize it, but other people outside space who are, not an operator don't realize it. Working in this space, the Web3 space, is like dog years. 1 year is equivalent of like 7 years of wear and tear on your body and your psyche. It is hard work. It's very fulfilling work. Now, from an Ava Labs perspective, specific to Ava Labs, we were 10 people in a WeWork-like room in Williamsburg, Brooklyn, 5 years ago, mostly developers and myself. We were literally sleeves rolled up, putting desks together, putting computers together, getting onto the Wi-Fi together, all of that. There was a good bond there, in the trenches with your brother, so to speak. Now we're 250 people all over the world. So it's been an incredible journey, very fulfilling, like I said. And every day I have to remind myself where we came from, because that ethos and that drive is what keeps us going today. But at the same time, we have to make adjustments. Every business, whether it's Web3 or Web2 or a fund or anything, you become a victim of your success if you don't grow with the success.
Also, in our space in particular, I would say every 6 months, you're almost a new company, right? You have to force yourself to evolve. And
you have to evolve, you have to innovate, and you have to look at the culture and try to migrate the culture. In the early days, you wanted people who really were crypto native, understand how Web3 works, and really imbued the ethos of open innovation. As the business grows, and you want to be people who are stubborn and try everything and iterate and do everything possible. But as the business grows and you have so many people, you have to be able to say no to things. Otherwise, you'll never get anything done. You have to prioritize. You also have to bring in a slightly different culture where it's more execution and operations oriented, as opposed to just I'm going to do everything and I'm a great entrepreneur. I'm going to try it and just be visionary. So you have to manage cultural shifts and align processes in the growth of the firm with those shifts based on the business needs and the cycle of where you are in the maturity of the company.
Absolutely. And we'll circle back to that later, John. But for the time being, a question for you. So in the past two episodes with Solana and Stacks, we've discussed the monolithic versus the modular approach to blockchain architecture. So Avalanche stands out, obviously, with its well-known modular multi-chain design. Could you explain to the audience here how this architecture works and why Avalanche adopted this approach?
So part of the original vision that Dr. Gun had was that scaling can be done either vertically or horizontally. The monolithic chains, there are basically one chain, one asset, or one chain, many assets. And it's, very vertical with stacks to fulfill the entire functionality suite, if you will. The thought of horizontal scaling was more attractive to Gun and to the founders of the Avalanche protocol, because they always had in mind that one size does not fit all. Basically, it's like when you go shopping for clothes or shopping for whatever, like, large doesn't mean large for everyone. This is what customizable blockchain suited for the desires of the client, the products they're trying to create. That is very important so they can create the right application in their own blockchain. That's part of why horizontal scaling was super important and early in the architecture in the vision of Dr. Ava Labs.
And these unique infrastructure choices must influence the type of the applications that are being built on the network. So can you share some real world examples where you can see the impact of these choices?
It gives a really diverse group of developers that will want to deploy, because really what Avalanche is a network of blockchains that are interoperable. So the fact that you can have your own isolated execution environment will attract gaming companies like Off the Grid, well, Gonzilla, who created Off the Grid, which we should get into later because it's an incredible game that in 2 weeks is challenging Fortnite as to the most popular game out there. Last weekend, actually, it was #1 in the Epic Center as the #1 game over Fortnite. A gaming company that they cannot have their execution environment affected by the execution environment of other things. So if there's a surge in activity elsewhere, they don't want that to affect their game players. That's a perfect example of a gaming company choosing. Diversity of the L1s that are being created on the network. There's traditional finance companies. We just helped Franklin Templeton tokenize money market funds. Now, they have their own requirements, compliance, regulation. They need to have, call it a more proof of authority type environment permission, but they want the optionality to go permissionless. So they're attracted to this as well. And then, not to be lost, very important, native applications. Think of it like a Dexalot. Dexalot is a top 10 decentralized exchange in Web3. They have when you're a Dex, you have to have high throughput. They have different desires. So they have their own L1. So to answer your question more succinctly, it's like it tracks almost a far more diverse group of developers than you would in a monolithic chain.
So I want to circle back on this later. Avalanche is also very well known for its institutional approach, right? The grown-up guys, the ones that are trying to scale the traditional finance, actually you alluded to earlier from your own experience, and focusing bridging the gap between the TradFi and decentralized finance, specifically in real-world asset space and some others. Could you speak to the power of real-world asset, as we called it, and how you are enabling institutions to tokenize real-world assets? Obviously, with my even previous firm, Citi, I know you guys been doing a lot with other institutions too, but very love you to share more with the audience here, like great work you guys have done there.
Well, in the Citi example, we helped them create a proof of concept to settle a bilateral FX trade. That enabled them to have instant finality, settle much quicker, unlocks trapped capital. So the question specifically is how do you, as opposed to what have you done? So how do we do it? In that example is we help them with proof of concepts so that they can see the power of the technology. We've actually deployed actual live things like with tokenizing money market funds for Franklin Templeton. We have stable coins that we've tokenized as well on chain. So what I see is very exciting, and it is call it the movement of value on chain. And I think product market fit for stablecoins is here. Andreessen just did a big write-up where they said there was more than 8 trillion settled on chain. That's 2x that of Visa. I think that's very real. Stripe just bought the Stripe of Web3 bridge for a lot of money, by the way. So this concept of moving value around on chain in a more efficient, as a more efficient technology is here. And I think in the next year or so, we will hopefully get more certainty in regulation so that this can even grow faster.
Awesome. Let's talk about Avalanche 9000, the major upgrade on the horizon. John, can you share with the audience what does Avalanche 9000 represent in the future of the network, and how does it align with your broader goal for Avalanche ecosystem?
So Avalanche 9000, we just had a big summit to announce it in Argentina. Beautiful country, by the way. Avalanche 9000, frankly, it's a series of updates culminating in this announcement last week, where it's effectively a gigantic upgrade to the network since the mainnet, as you said earlier in the introduction. What it allows is it provides a lot more functionality for developers of all kinds in order to create their applications on their own blockchains. That's what Avalanche 9000 is. And we basically unleashed it and announced it at the same time at a big summit where we invited a lot of developers to come and try it out.
Is there any specific key challenges you wanted to address with this upgrade, both from like a technical standpoint, but also from like a user experience standpoint?
Yeah. So Avalanche is very much, the blockchain is about creating efficiency, ease of use for developers. But yes, the community is also users. So Ava Labs is constantly listening to the community, trying to figure out what's important. And I think to answer your question, it's really about prioritizing different functionality.
Right.
And based on the feedback from the community, we had to design the upgrades based on the desired needs of the community. And that was the biggest challenge, to really say, okay, we need this, we don't need that, and then going forward, we're going to do this next. That's the hard part. You have to listen to the community and figure out which one should be more prioritized than others.
And you talk about the Argentina conference, we were just chatting a little bit before the podcast, you want to share with the audience the excitements and from the communities and, what's the most topical and talk about stuff?
Well, let's talk about the country, first of all. I think obviously most people know that Argentina was a heavy inflation country for the last many years now. Javier Milei, the new president, has put in a lot of controls to hamper inflation, but it's still very high. I think it's still like 3% a month. It's not a year like we have here, it's a month. So when an Argentine person receives their pesos, they literally do one of three things. One, they go to the black market and try to convert to dollar and pay a huge fee, 20% plus sometimes, to do that, because there's no reason to hold the peso because it'll devalue. The second thing a lot of them do is go into crypto, because better store of value, even though you can argue whether crypto is a great traditional store of value, but it's better than the peso. And lastly, the thing they can do is basically spend it as fast as they can. So no one has any savings. So it is a great environment for, the point is 30 to 40% of the people transact daily in blockchain or crypto, call it, whether stablecoin or Bitcoin or other assets. They are very aware and understanding of the Web3 and crypto environment. So it's a pleasure to go to the country and work with developers in the country who have great ideas on how to help their own country out for the actual users. And you don't have to start from ground zero. They just get it from day one. And sometimes it's actually harder to develop things in the US because the existing rails are so good. It's like, why do I need that? P2P payment? I have Venmo. I have PayPal. Why do I need that? I have Zelle. You really appreciate it when you go to countries where if you want to convert to a dollar, not only do you have the currency rate is Subsec, but you have to pay an extra 20% plus just to convert it. You really understand the value of stable coins and crypto and how it can really affect individuals' lives in these countries. So you don't have to explain too many things. They just get it right away.
Right. Right. Um, I want to talk about Ava Labs. I want to talk about building the ecosystems for the developers. I think we both agree a vibrant developer communities is essential for any protocol success. How is Ava Labs on the lab side supporting the developers and attracting talents to build on Avalanche?
So the lab side is very focused, kind of like Red Hat was for Linux, creating, software and services integration and helping integrate things for the big institutions or enterprises that want to deploy on a blockchain, or create their own network, if you will. Because when you're these large institutions, even though you have a lot of resources and talent, they don't want to, they expect the handholding. It's like a white glove service.
Right.
It's a different level of what they require, and you need a Ava Labs team to do that. For the crypto native developers, the foundation has a great plan called Retro 9000. So I think it's a $40 million grant to allow individual developers, entrepreneurs to have even a more cost-effective way of developing on the L1s on Avalanche. So it's being both sides, the smaller entrepreneur to the big institution, are all being addressed in different ways.
I was about to ask you actually a follow-on question. I think you already alluded to is how would you actually, as a foundation or as the lab, to sort of like balance that support? Because on one side, Avalanche is known for the partnership with large institutions like Franklin Templeton, cities, and many others. But on the other side, there's a lot of grassroots projects and developers in the ecosystem that needs a different type of supports, right? So I guess when you look at your funding, your marketing, and many other things, these are typically a different type of approach. Can you just share a bit of insights how you
Ava
guide around
Labs is
that?
just another, developer on Avalanche. It's a
Right.
very decentralized environment. Obviously, Ava Labs have people who were the early days of Avalanche, so they understand it, but it's very decentralized. Sometimes it's inefficient, there'll be overlap. But I think the important thing is that the mission of the foundation board and Ava Labs is to, understand that we need to grow that ecosystem. So I think it's mission first as opposed to operations first.
Got it. And are you seeing more developers that gravitate towards building custom subnets and chains, or is there still a focus on dApps that build on the main chains?
There's definitely a push towards their own L1s. They used to be branded subnets, but it's not, it's an inaccurate description because it's not subordinate, it's their own self-sovereign chain. So there's definitely a push for it. There are things like, I hope we get to talk about this game again off the grid. I mean, 8 million wallets created in 2 weeks, cumulatively of over like 50 million to 60 million transactions already. It had 1.6 million Twitch hours viewed already. It was, top in the Epic game store. So that is a perfect example of like a game that would happen regardless. They raised $100 million. It's a AAA published game. I encourage everyone to go check it out. The gameplay is incredible. It was going to be a successful game regardless. But putting it on a blockchain, especially an Avalanche network blockchain, enhances the in-game asset, user asset ownership experience. It made it more efficient. People actually felt like they owned the asset. And it's got a lot of growth outside of the traditional way. That is enhancing an existing business. That is super exciting. But
Yeah,
I
we
think
often talk about this, John, right? Because I think blockchain is probably not the best technology. It's trying to re-engineer the gaming contents and gaming design, right? These games are fantastic AAA games, whether they build on blockchain or not. Actually, I would probably argue they're probably better built off chain, so they're actually faster and having a lower latency and so on and so forth. What blockchain really able to fix, which hasn't been really fixed in the last 50 years, is in the gaming providing that social fabric, is your ownership of the in-gaming assets, the interoperability of those gaming assets, even intra games and inter games. These type of stuff is something which has always been a big pain point. And if you be able to partner up with, layer one like Avalanche, that they can actually design their subnets or leveraging the mainnet, that's something really can solve a very big pain points in the gaming sector.
Well, I think you brought a very good point, and it's also a little bit philosophical because, traditional open source stuff is open source technology.
Right.
It's okay, you can use someone else's technology, you can build on top of it, etc. But Web3 is, in my opinion, not just an open source technology, it's an ethos and a mindset, an appreciation for having your own identity, having your own data, being able to use it the way you want to, being able to go to market faster because you're built on something else, being able to crowdsource development, fundraising. It is a mindset as much as it is a technology. So I think, again, going back to that specific example, when a user actually thinks that asset is really theirs, in that case specifically, you are probably going to have far more activity and engagement from that user than you would in a in-game marketplace that you can't really take off your grid. When you're done playing that game 3 years later, whatever game that is, and your axes and arrows and shields are still in the game, that's the equivalent of going to the old carnivals or arcades where you buy a bunch of quarters, or you give money and you get all these, quarter-like things, but they're not really a quarter, they're worth $1 each or whatever, and you play, but then all of a sudden, your mom says you have to go home, you still have these stack of coins, you know what to do with it. It's not really yours. You just never feel like that is yours. Whereas here, you're like, okay, I'll take these coins, go to the next arcade for the next day. That's the beauty of Web3 and open source and community thinking.
That's very well said. Um, Avalanche doesn't operate in a vacuum, despite all of these superiorities and technologies. How do you see Avalanche fitting into the broader Web3 ecosystem, in particularly, collaborating, competing, working with the other layer one ecosystems like Bitcoin, Ethereum, Solana, and so on and so forth?
And there's no doubt, in my opinion, I think yours as well, that ultimately it's a multi-chain world.
Right.
So Avalanche is a network of interoperable chains, but it's also EVM compatible. And with bridges, assets can move back and forth between Ethereum and the Avalanche network. So it's already very call it interoperable with others. And anyone can, I believe there are people building a Move VM on Avalanche. So it is a customizable protocol that allows more interoperability than probably a lot of other single silo or monolithic chains, if you will.
Yeah.
So I think reality is history has shown, Matt, and you tell me if you disagree, but I think like history has shown that whether it's Blu-ray, DVDs to VHS versus Sony Betamax, the more open system is usually the one that wins because you have the power of many as opposed to just one creating everything.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's going to be very encouraging for Avalanche, communities and others who hear that collaboration in multi-chain world. Because the space is still young, right? Very, very nuanced, and 100% agree with you because, like, I think there's so much work to be done for the whole community pushing towards the same direction versus like trying to fight over a pie which has not been that big yet, or is big but have a potential to be much, much bigger.
It's
Um,
ironic that there's such tribalism, right?
right,
Because, Web 2 is about creating moats and fighting over a fixed pie.
right.
In Web 3, the reality is the only way you have an edge or a moat, if you will, in traditional parlance is you're continue to innovate and you get to build on top of others and you're constantly getting the collective wisdom to move forward. So they shouldn't be as tribal. It should be collaborative. And the fact is, I think you just alluded to it, the number of users and developers in the Web3 space is still very small compared to traditional Web 2. And I think there's a time and moment right now where I think a lot of people realize that there a lot of power and a lot of functionality and a lot of your lives now, individual daily lives, have been aggregated into very few companies. We're talking
Hmm.
about 6, 7 companies in California and Seattle that really are very, they're large, they're gigantic. In fact, I think Apple or NVIDIA alone would be a top 4 or 5 in terms of their market cap versus the GDP of countries out there. I think the UK is only a 3 trillion, GDP country now. Apple and Nvidia each are 3.5, trillion market cap. So I think people realize it's somewhat bothersome that it's so centralized. So
Right.
maybe this Web3 can at least give a slightly different path and create some decentralization, at least a choice.
I never thought that way, but if you're 100% right, if you say go to S&P 500, you rank them by market cap, and you take out the top 10 out there, your life gonna look very, very different. Your phone, your email, your infrastructure, like how you get out, how you communicate with your friends, your social network, everything is gonna be taken away. That's another way to think about how concentrated before you even realizing it, right?
Yeah. But, I've read the stat also in terms of Facebook, obviously 3 billion plus users, whether it's WhatsApp, Facebook, or Instagram. But people have been surveyed and said, do you realize that Facebook is collecting your data and using it to sell you things, et cetera, and you're actually the product, right? And people say yes, and they ask them, do you realize that your privacy is being invaded? They say yes, but other people who say yes, 95% still go back to use it
Yeah,
because it's
what's
the
the
only way they
choice?
communicate. Yeah, they have no choice.
John, I want to switching to a slightly different topic and related topic is I want to talk about you, or us as the founders and entrepreneurs in the space because I still remember vividly, when I left City, one of the first conversation was us, having dinner and chatting about the space. I mean, I think that was almost 3 years ago, almost exactly
At
3 years
least three
ago.
years ago. Yeah, at least.
And in 3 years' time, obviously, a lot has changed, right? You know, um, the space, the people in the space, the largest, exchanges, the funds, projects back 3 years ago in 2021 versus today. I think as a entrepreneur, or just generally a human being, there's going to be a lot of also roller coaster from a mental standpoint. There's very exciting stuff, rewarding stuff. As you said, being a startup, founder, co-founder, entrepreneur. I mean, especially in our space, but crypto has made everything very much exaggerated, right? Your best days, your worst day, at least for me, I feel it's like so much different apart. So I want to ask you, like, how are you doing? How are you feeling? What is the learning from you being in the space since 2020? You must see a lot of up and downs. Any advice you can share with the fellow, entrepreneurs and builders that are still putting the time in the space?
Well, you recall, well, two things I'd say that. Obviously, what you're referring to is an emerging technology, especially crypto or blockchain. There's a lot of volatility. I'm not talking about asset prices. I'm talking about just the daily
The
operation
journey.
success. But this happens with any entrepreneur. I've talked to other entrepreneurs, literally in traditional SaaS type companies, where they have said, there's been, and they've been on a 7-year journey. And they've said many times to me, like, over those 7 years, there was probably like 5 to 6 times I really wonder if I just turned the lights out on the building for the last time because they were so worried about the next round of funding.
Mm-hmm.
That kind of personal volatility is not easy, but it is true and there. And this is why, founders and entrepreneurs deserve a lot of kudos for being able to go from the very beginning pains and struggles to hopefully success. And even today, when entrepreneurship has been what I call institutionalized, the success rate is still very low. People don't realize that. You only hear about the great stories. Everyone wants to drop out of college because they recite Mark Zuckerberg or Bill Gates or Michael Dell or someone, and then, you don't want to drop out of college. Generally speaking, you don't want to drop out of college. Okay.
Yes.
It better work if you drop out of college. So I think one of the conversations that we had, I was purposely being a little bit antagonistic to you because I wanted to test your conviction level. And entrepreneurialism, what I talked about before, requires a personality that is very stubborn.
Mm-hmm.
And you are just, you are not, in some way, you're, not a rational maximizer. So, I think Thaler, the University of Chicago economist, talked about rational maximization. You are not that. Because
can't be. If you're
if you're an
constantly
entrepreneur, especially
maximizing it,
someone
you will
like
quit
yourself or
3
someone who
times.
has a storied career somewhere else,
Yeah.
the expected value of success is not good. So
Yeah.
you're not acting as a rational maximizer. But behavioral economics will tell you that human beings actually act based on other things like emotions and act. Unfortunately, even the smartest people act somewhat irrational. So
Yeah.
yeah, I was kind of testing your conviction level. And you proved to me that not only were, because of your previous background of dealing with P&L, that you can tolerate ups and downs, volatility in other words, but you were highly convicted and you were going to go through what it took. And you had a mission and a goal, because you need that. If you don't have that North Star, then it's like, why am I doing this? You can just get a job somewhere.
Definitely. I mean, this is very well said, and thank you for the comments. For me personally too, it's like been an amazing, very rewarding journey. I have, looking back, no regrets about jumping into the space, doing this. But just like you said, right? If you're a very rational person, there may be many times in the last 3, 4 years you would want probably think, hey, maybe quitting and doing something different. The pivoting is like a better financial economics outcome in a very narrow definition. But if you zoom out, right, like you're getting so much rewarding in the frontier space like we're in, and trying to do certain things that's beyond just like economical optimization in a very narrow sense.
Well, I mean, especially for people like yourself and myself, where you have other opportunities, um, it's very hard, because if you go through just the expected value analysis, there's things, right? And if it's just
Yes.
pure numbers. But I think one thing that society's done that's interesting is given some sort of like this glow culturally around entrepreneurism, and a premium for associated with that, which was not always the case 10, 20 years ago, right?
Right.
So I think it's almost a badge and a pride and honor to say I tried it and
I
I
did
did
this,
that.
I raised this amount, I sold this company, I took this company IPO. 20 years ago, it could be just you own a small, medium business. Now you get called entrepreneur, right? That
Yeah,
keeps some people going for a little longer.
yeah.
Um, I want to come back to Avalanche. Looking ahead, what trends do you think that would be the most influential in shaping the future of blockchain technologies, Web3 as a whole, and specifically, what role do you see Avalanche taking and playing in bridging and getting that to the mainstream?
So the first thing I mentioned on Avalanche is that I think there's over 130, 135 L1s, and most of them are in what they call testnet or proof of authority. So literally in the next, call it a quarter or 2 quarter, by first half of 2025, you're going to see massive inflection point where a lot of these testnet, because of the 9,000 upgrade, go on to main net, so to speak, and go really live. That's going to be, I'm hoping hundreds of millions of transactions next year, as you see all of these L1s go live. That's very important to think about. In terms of what I see for the space of Web3, I think next year is going to be very interesting. I do think that we're going to come to a point where there needs to be a better understanding of what is a stablecoin and what are the reserves required in order to have a stablecoin. So once that is figured out, I think you're going to see even more explosion of the use cases of moving value around. And then from that, you're going to get a lot more applications taking advantage of those rails. This is literally why, Stripe is buying Bridge for such a premium, because there's a lot of disruption that's going to happen when these are the rails that become acceptable as opposed to the old Visa rails. I mean, information has been somewhat commoditized down to the exchanging of it to almost zero because of the internet. Value, for some reason, it still costs you 250 to 3% to swipe a card and to get, it costs the merchant, and invariably it does cost the consumer also to move value around. Not sure why that hasn't really come down in 30, 40 years. Here's the opportunity. Here's the inflection point where that value created can be not only passed to merchants, but also passed down to consumers.
And with all of that being said in that context, what do you think will be the defining moments, the milestones for Avalanche next phase of growth, say next 2 or 3 years?
When you have the ability to move value around easily, especially when you have 135 different L1s all launching, that interoperability from a technology perspective becomes even better from a value perspective. Suddenly, you really can transfer your in-game asset from game XYZ to maybe find a market where someone wants to exchange a delta points or whatever for you at a given underlying, exchange rate negotiated. That can actually be a possibility and be done very quickly and easily.
John, as always, we like to end the episode of our podcast with bold predictions. So I'm gonna do the same thing to you too. What's your boldest prediction for the Avalanche ecosystem? What do you think Avalanche network will unlock in the next 5 to 10 years?
Well, that's different. 5 to 10 years versus 0 to 5. Okay.
Right.
Five
Well,
to
give us
10
both.
years. 5 to 10 years, I think the Avalanche network of networks leads the way in creating and abstracting away the underlying blockchain. So in other words, it's just going to be like Intel Inside, powered by Avalanche. Gonzilla creates off-the-grid powered by Avalanche. And it's just going to be in the background. And that's going to be pervasive in anything you see that requires a blockchain. I think that's the prediction, the 5 to 10 year time frame.
Amazing, and good luck, and certainly hoping that would happen. Again, thank you so.
I'm not going to let you off the hook. I'm going to reverse it and ask you, what's your biggest prediction in the next 5 years?
I think it's hard to talk about 0 to 5, so I'm going to do the same. I will give you also what I think the space will look like in 5 to 10 years. I think that in 5 to 10 years, so all right, so let me do the same analogies. 10, 15 years ago, I remembered, Jack Ma from Alibaba. He made a very famous bet in China to say, this was in the mid of 2005, called it, right? This is even before mobile internet stage. He said he believed the online economy will be bigger than the offline economy in 15 years, in 10, 15 years. Fast forwarding 2020, 5 years later, actually the online economy probably is as big, if not bigger than the offline economy. People do e-commerce, payments, make transactions, social, all of this actually online. And today, maybe even bigger. My biggest bold prediction in 5 to 10 years is I think decentralized online economy will be as big, if it's not bigger, than the centralized online economy. From variation of AI, data integrity, digital identity, to building a truly decentralized financial ecosystem. You mentioned about stablecoins are obviously going to be a key part of it. To really having more economics agent. What I mean by that is today you have 6 billion, 7 billion people in the world. Maybe 20, 30% of that is constantly every day using the internet. I think the internet adoption rate will naturally grow and grow further. A big proxy is how many people buying iPhones, how many people register Gmails, and so on and so forth. But I think separately, you'll see very likely in 5 to 10 years, you will have a lot of AI agent. And this AI agent will have certain type of intelligence that they will be able to transact among each other, not just AI to human,
Well, I mean,
but
the
AI
story
to
of
AI.
story of this week is Truth Terminal. And
there you go,
that
exactly.
whole
And that's getting so much hype and focus and interest on, Twitter and X. I think if you need AI to AI type of transactions, communications, and, and they're not bound by population, John, right? They could have more than 7 billions in a year. You need a financial ecosystem that built for people that don't have a passport. So the only way for AI agent to communicating and connecting and transacting financially with humans or among themselves is really building that decentralized, trustless financial ecosystems. So my AI agent can order pizza from your AI agent who actually makes the pizza. And all I have to say is I want a pepperoni pizza, get it from the cheapest store in New York City, and I can get it delivered without actually having me to validate making the payment, scan my face, and so on and so forth. So coming back to my biggest bold prediction in the next 5 to 10 years is that hopefully Avalanche is going to play a big part in this, but I truly believe the decentralized online economy is going to be as big, if not bigger, than offline.
I'm not going to let you off the hook yet. So, you start your this podcast is called The Future of Money, is it?
Yes, total value unlocked, right? We talk about future of money and technology.
Total value unlocked. Economic systems have, been about people,
right.
and, production and GDP and all that. Suddenly you're going to have online economies where it's machine to machine, based on what you're talking about. What happens to money in that world? Is it, how do you, especially if you can now all of a sudden, your agent talk to my agent or whatever. That's a very, basic example. But all of a sudden, if your loyalty points and royalty points at one place is fungible with another, and then you're not actually spending the money in the traditional route, does that mean the velocity of money is actually decreasing? Because you're getting the value, but you're not actually putting it into the system in some way.
I think
almost an exchange.
I think this is almost not a financial question or technology question, it's like a philosophical question, right? Because like where the money derives from, the value of money derives from is facilitating the transactions within the societies and then making sure the velocity is there. That's how M0, M1, M2 concept was, coming from. For people like us, we sort of know that concept very, very well. I think you raised a very, very good point, which we should probably have a second podcast at some point, discuss this in detail, because I think this topic itself deserves another hour of discussion. Is in that AI to AI, human to human financial ecosystems, what is money? And how you design it? Does everything becomes money, or some sort of other points or goods, as long as they're programmable, they becoming the part of that velocity ecosystem. So that's something which is fascinating to even think about, right? But I think even without digger deeper about this, the only thing I could just say is I think in that world, you need a different type of money, decentralized, programmable, trustless, that allow agents, human to agents, be able to transact securely, smoothly. And that's how I see the next trillions of value going to be created from.
Well, hopefully that increases the gross domestic product of the countries that embrace both technologies, AI and Web3.
Absolutely. Once again, John, thank you so much for joining us today. I had a wonderful conversations. I hope you enjoyed the conversations too. For our listeners, can you share where can they follow you or work and learn about Avalanche and find you?
Yep. On Twitter, it's at John, the number 1 Wu. Please follow me there for the most up-to-date stuff. Otherwise, go to the avalabs.org website. You can follow news there, and basically I'm on LinkedIn. I'm on all the existing networks.
Amazing. Well, once again, thanks for coming here, John. Had a good time, and hopefully see you very soon.
Likewise. Thank you.
All right. Bye.
Bye.